We are so back. What's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Extra Zone Arcade, where reviewing games late is my trademark. Today we're going to cover my most anticipated release of 2024, and as you're about to see, my favourite. The reason I'm late to the party? Life got in the way, as it tends to do. But without further ado, let's talk about Sonic X Shadow Generations and why it's a near-perfect Sonic package. So, you might remember that this game was leaked a couple weeks ahead of its announcement. My first thoughts were, A, I wasn't expecting a new Sonic release in 2024 after such a busy last couple years, and B, Sonic X Shadow Generations? That's the kind of title that could land you some very risky search results. Then came the PlayStation State of Play in late January, where it was revealed that the game would be a, spoiler alert, mostly unchanged remaster of 2011's Sonic Generations, packaged in with a new Shadow Focus campaign. Right off the bat, I was crazy hyped for this thing. The gameplay looked solid, the animation quality was crisp, the graphics were a step up, and motherfucking Black Doom from Shadow 2005 was back. A pretty damn good first impression if I do say so myself. Fast forward several months to June, where we got another trailer for Summer Game Fest. This time around we got the reveal of Rail Canyon and Kingdom Valley returning, as well as a look at Shadow's new Doom Wings power. As the summer season came and went, we got more trailers showing off more levels like Sunset Heights and Chaos Island, bosses like Metal Overlord and Mephiles, and a story trailer. You can probably tell from the amount of videos I made during that period just how excited I really was for this thing. And also my ability to not shut up about Sonic for more than a few minutes, but hopefully that's why you're watching this. Subscribe for more of that. So, with all the build up and hype from across the fanbase and general gaming audience, did Sonic X Shadow Generations stick the landing? Let's talk about it. Spoiler alert! The main focus of this video is going to be on the Shadow Generations portion that features a unique new story. If you don't want to know what happens, skip past the plot summary or come back to this video later. You have been warned. So yeah, the main focus here is obviously going to be on Shadow Generations, so let's talk a little about the Sonic Generations remaster. Colors Ultimate this ain't, which is good, but that being said, it does mean I don't have much to say since not much has changed. It's Generations' same fantastic gameplay that defined the Boost formula in 2011, and is still great now with slightly upscaled graphics. The biggest changes are in the dialogue. Ian Flynn, writer on the Archie and IDW comic series, who was brought on to write the games, starting with Frontiers, was tasked with rewriting this remaster. From what I can tell, this has been the subject of controversy, along with them covering approximately 1 inch of Rouge's back. Seriously, you all need to go outside, due to the dialogue changes not matching the animation and excessive references. That first one I understand, as there are lines like this one where it makes it seem like classic Sonic 8 Angel Island, but I just can't understand why we'd be complaining about references in an anniversary game. You know, the type of game that should be full of references. Overall, I find the dialogue changes are completely harmless and in some cases do a better job at tying into the larger Sonic mythos. That being said, I'm not sure I like what they're doing with Amy. I get Sega wants to tone her down a little so that she seems less obsessive, which I do think is for the best, but there's no point literally rewriting history. If Amy launched Knuckles into a tree, she launched him into a tree. There's no reason for this and her holding cupcakes instead of trying to hug Sonic to be the only things that got reanimated. But hey, maybe I'll make a video on this at some point if you guys want to see that. Anyway, massive tangent aside, there was one more feature added to this remaster, that being the Chow Rescue. In each act there are 3 hidden Chow to find, all of varying types. Some of these are hidden really well, so keep an eye out and make sure to check the collection room for hints at their location. Keep in mind you don't get anything for collecting all of them other than an achievement, which obviously doesn't apply to the Switch version. It's really just there to give people who played the original something else to do in this game, which is appreciated. My biggest issue with the remaster is really just that I wish some of the quirks of the original were ironed out, mainly with the time meter fight. That thing is just about as janky as ever, but at least with the higher resolution it's easier to see what's happening. Generally speaking, this remaster is good, though it honestly is more of an upscaled port than anything. I think by default this is the best way to play Generations now, especially with it being widely available on all platforms again. Now for the thing you're probably actually here for. First, let's talk about Shadow Generations' story, because oh boy, there is a lot to cover. For those of you new to Shadow's story or in need of a refresher, there's an option on the menu that gives you a recap with a neat little presentation. The plot of this game takes place during the events of Sonic Generations, with the Time Eater attacking and sending everyone to Whitespace. This includes Shadow, who's aboard the Ark after receiving a tip from Gun about a powerful source of energy on the abandoned space station. You can see how we get here in the beautifully animated Dark Beginnings miniseries on YouTube. Love to see them continue that trend and do it better each time. One detail I like during this opening cutscene is how when it cuts to Rouge, she's rendered in the Hedgehog Engine 1 to be consistent with Sonic Generations. I can't think of another game that does something like that, but I just think it was a neat attention to detail. Back to the story, Shadow locks on and tracks down the energy to find that it's his nemesis and deadbeat father, Black Doom. He's gained a new ability since the last time. a dimension that can bend to his very will that also happens to look a lot like Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2. Shadow ends up in the Ark's central control room where he finds Tails' fake emerald and decides to take it with him. This will actually be important later. Suddenly, the Time Eater attacks and Shadow is sent to White Space where he meets up with Omega. Shadow is faced with going through places and enemies from his past, meeting familiar faces like Orbot, Cubot and Big the Cat along the way. At one point, his and Sonic's adventures cross over with a fight for that damn 4th Chaos Emerald. Sonic wins that fight, but Shadow purposefully dropped the fake emerald he picked up earlier. This moment was actually genius. Rouge comes in just after and then they plan to have her swap the emeralds again while Sonic isn't looking, so they can both use the real thing when they need to. Shadow also gets some new powers of his own by awakening his mostly dormant Black Arm's DNA. Eventually, it happens. After catching a glimpse before, not believing what he was seeing, he meets her face to face. That's right, Maria is back along with Gerald, pulled from a time right before the tragic incident aboard the Ark. Hoping he can change their fate, he vows to use his newfound power to take Black Doom head on, making absolute sure he and the Black Arms are completely destroyed. However, Shadow's anger with all these old wounds opening back up is giving Black Doom what he wants. With Shadow bearing his blood, he wants to use him to create the perfect being, one that will serve his every will. With the help of Maria and Gerald's guiding hands, Shadow lets go of that anger and finally surpasses Black Doom. With the first ever genuine Shadow the Hedgehog smile, trademark, he assures Maria that he'll stay true to the promise he made to her all those years ago. A promise that from her perspective, she hasn't even made yet. So it all wraps back around really neatly. I really love that. He destroys the alien warlord once again and releases the White Space from Doom's influence. Meeting back up with the Robotniks, they begin to return to their own time. And we all know what that means. Shadow of course is distraught about this, suggesting ways to save them, but it's just not possible. He has to completely let go of his past, as hard as it may be. And so, the ultimate lifeform sheds a tear as the credits roll and the curtain falls on this tragic tale. Oh, and then he tells Sonic to get the fuck up and fight just a few minutes later or something. But man, this story really was something incredible. In just several hours, they managed to tell an extremely compelling story that respects the journey Shadow has been on, while leaving him in a good place for the future. The return of all these faces from his past really does give you a perspective on just how far he's come as a character. It does just about everything you'd want out of this scenario, with plenty of emotional moments, high-stake action, and the occasional moment of levity. Ian Flynn and the lore team really understand Shadow, and it's clear just how much thought and care was put into everything here. This might be one of the best stories in any Sonic game period, and it's just so funny to see the difference in tone between this and Sonic Generations. That game barely had a plot to speak of on top of that. I'm extremely optimistic to see where they take Shadow from here. He's now in the best place he's been at writing and development wise since 2006, and I hope they keep the train going. An incredible story is one thing, but how does the gameplay measure up? The short answer is, it does. It absolutely does in every possible way. But that's boring, so let's go into depth. First, the controls are incredibly smooth and responsive. The best I can describe it is like they mix Frontiers, Open Zone, and Forces boost controls into one. You might immediately think, well, that can't be good at all, but you just gotta hear me out. Turning with him feels fantastic, as with the controls while not boosting in general. The boost itself is actually really satisfying to use and still gives you enough degrees of control compared to Sonic Generations' much more tanky feel. Shadow also doesn't accelerate from 0 to 100 in less than a second like Forces or feel as stiff as Frontiers cyberspace controls. This is in my opinion one of the best feeling 3D Sonic controls. It's not quite as sharp as Frontiers, but the game is designed around that, so that's no problem. The only thing that could be better is just that Shadow loses a good deal of momentum while jumping, which was something present in Frontiers before Update 2. That could always end up being patched. With this being a boost formula game, you get all the usual moves like the slide, stomp, double jump, homing attack, and of course, the boost. The quickstep has been retooled into more of a lateral slide, which can actually be more useful at times than the quickstep has been in recent games. That and the animation looks cool as hell. Since we're playing as Shadow, we also have multiple Chaos abilities we can use. Chaos Spear fires out an energy projectile that can stun enemies and activate switches. And Chaos Control can stop time for 5 seconds when the energy meter is filled. This move has a ton of applications like dodging obstacles with ease, taking alternate paths, warping ahead, and even making S-ranks easier since it stops the in-game timer as well. A super versatile move all around, and you get a ton of cool QuickTime events involving it to boot. Our level selection is pretty fantastic. There are 6 zones with 2 acts, one being fully 3D and the other being 2D. The only exception is the final zone that features 2 3D acts. First up is Space Colony Arc, which takes cues from Final Rush, Crazy Gadget, and in Act 2, Final Chase. An incredible opening to an incredible game with tons of alternate paths, a great remix, and substantial length. It's clear how much work was put into the level design from the jump. There's not a moment where the game plays itself, and almost every turn will have something to explore. Rail Canyon is a very faithful recreation, down to even being able to land on top of the terminal at the end of Act 1, and Act 2 having a remix of Bullet Station's theme. The graphics for this one are incredibly crisp, and although it mostly takes place on rails, obviously, there's enough variety to keep me from ever getting bored. Kingdom Valley's return was really awesome to see. It was probably one of the better stages in 06's lineup and the one featured on the game's box art, so it's a little surprising it wasn't picked in the original generations. Either way, it's here and has all the strengths of the previous levels. I love that the end of Act 1 takes place in what would be the Mach Speed section of the original, and Act 2 is, in my opinion, the best 2D level in the entire game. This zone as a whole probably had the most alternate paths and ways to do crazy skips that were extremely fun and satisfying to find. But it wasn't my favourite zone. No, that goes to Sunset Heights, which makes a surprising return from Sonic Forces. Now look, I don't think that game is nearly as bad as people make it out to be. It's also not good though, mostly due to its wasted potential. So tell me how they somehow met that potential in a single level in Shadow Generations. I'm being dead serious here. Act 1 specifically absolutely blows Forces version out of the water. Things that used to just be background elements like the spraying water and the Death Egg robots are now fully interactive stage gimmicks. This is how it should have been all along. The remixes also go insanely hard as someone who actually enjoys Forces OST. Top 10 3D Sonic level of all time, easily. Then we got Chaos Island from Frontiers, which is a little weird. I think for these two particular zones they probably pulled from whatever assets they had and that's how they made it in. Which is fine, and they do explain in game that they are locations from Shadow's future that were pulled here because of the time and space anomaly. But that does raise the question of if some point Shadow visits the Starfall Islands. Just something to think about. Anyway, this stage was not my favourite at first, but once I got used to the main Doom power you use here, it became an extremely fun one to go fast in. You know, we should probably talk about those things before we get into the final stage here, shouldn't we? So, quick Doom power rundown. The first one you get is the Doom Spears, which power up your Chaos Spear so it can lock onto and fire at multiple targets. Again, this is really mostly used to activate switches. Doom Blast allows Shadow to kick Black Arm soldiers up into the air, launch them forward, and then teleport to them to do one last hit Dragon Ball style. You can break walls, skip sections of levels, and get items with this power. This one might be my favourite just because of how satisfying the animations are. Next up is Doom Surf, which gives you this manta ray type thing that lets you cross large bodies of water. You also get a spin move that doubles as an attack and an evasive maneuver. This one was also a ton of fun to use, namely in a couple of the bosses we'll be talking about in a moment here. The Doom Morph was the one I was referring to when talking about Chaos Island, and yeah, it took me a little while to get the hang of this one. It's very unwieldy and the game doesn't do a great job of properly explaining how it works. You can choose to swing off the Chaos Blob Spider-Man style, or let go of the button at a certain point, launching you towards the opposite direction. It can also boost forward for a second or two. It's definitely a little awkward even when you have gotten used to it, but you can get into a pretty good flow state with it if used right. Lastly are the Doom Wings, the one that was featured in most of the marketing. You actually first get them in Space Colony Arc Act 2, but don't fully unlock them until after Chaos Island. After this point they can be used in any stage, and it pretty much acts as this game's Supersonic, since it consumes rings to stay in this form. Once you have them, you can make your way up to the Black Moon and play the game's final zone, Radical Highway. A handful of levels prior to this had Radical Highway sections where Black Doom would interrupt the level to send you there. So by the time you get here it can feel like the theme is a little tired, but I understand why they went with it thematically. This level represents Shadow's lowest point. A point in his life where his only goal was vengeance and destruction, which is what Black Doom wants to manipulate in Shadow. Having it as the final level makes sense, but it kinda would have been cooler to see something like the Black Comet from Shadow 2005 make it in. In fact, not having a single level from that game feels weird, though I guess since the story is so heavily focused on elements from that game, that would be its representation. Anyway, this zone can actually be pretty challenging without the Doom Wings, especially going for an S rank. You have to play very precisely to get it, and I always invite that kind of challenge in Sonic. Within reason, of course. Act 2 even brings these mini-boss monsters that seem to be based on an unused enemy from Shadow 05. Love when they do that. Those are just mini-bosses though. What about the major ones? Let's start with Shadow's big brother, Biolizard. The fight starts out similar to the original, but quickly changes up using a variety of crushing attacks with his new mutations. Of course, no matter what new tricks the ugly prototype has, Shadow still embarrasses him, and you even get some interesting dialogue here suggesting Shadow just wants to put him out of his misery. Next is Metal Overlord, which is a completely different fight from the original. I do like that they kind of adapted the whole flying as supersonic thing into surfing across the water, but it's a little weird that it takes place at Force's chemical plant. Ah well. One really cool thing is that if you try to use the Chaos Control, he'll actually call you out on it, since he has the ability to. The second phase where you bounce a crystal back and forth Ocarina of Time style was awesome, and the dialogue goes hard once again. Metal's really out here calling Shadow a fake hedgehog when he's the more organic one of the two. Just goes to show how deluded the guy really is. Now for my favourite boss, and probably the thing that made me pop off the most when it was revealed, Mephiles the Dark is back. Sealed away in a hidden area of white space, locked down with not the usual 3, but 4 boss gate keys. It really gives the impression that the timeline is suppressing him. This is some great continuity here, since 06's events never took place in the current timeline. In the fight itself, Mephiles' goal is literally to restore himself to the timeline. And that line where he screams, "I want to exist," genuine chills. You almost feel bad for the guy. Mechanically, the boss is great too. It mostly uses the Doom Morph as you chase Mephiles through this purple sludge stuff and then knock him into a few pillars with almost the same damn combo used on Infinite. Then Shadow just casually drops one of the coldest lines he's ever said when it's all said and done. Last fight is a rematch with Devil Doom, but this time Shadow's in his base form using the Doom powers. It kinda reminds me of how in Sonic Generations you take on Perfect Chaos in Sonic's base form, showing just how much stronger he's gotten since Adventure. I like to think it's a similar case here. In Phase 1 you knock some rocks into him with Doom Surf, smack him around a bit and then transition to using the Doom Morph. Swing across some platforms to dish out more damage to the devil and then it's on to the second phase, Neo Devil Doom. Badass name aside, this fight features an orchestral version of All Hail Shadow, which already makes it peak, and here, use the Doom Wings to catch up and give him a good combo to the eye. He actually has a lot of attacks at his disposal, but you can one-cycle him if you're good, which I would recommend you do if you're going for the no-hit trophy. This one took me a little while to get, but it was the last one I needed before getting the platinum, and man it was satisfying. You end the fight with a JoJo time stop moment where Shadow breaks out of Devil Doom's chaos control, delivers him some nice tasty chaos spears and then flies through him Giganto style. Huge step up from the final bosses we've gotten as of recent. The telegraphing is clear, no bullshit, no janky mechanics, and can be done fast if you've learned the patterns. Everything a Sonic boss should be. Puts these guys to shame. You can't fight all these bosses without first obtaining the boss keys, which, like in Sonic Generations, are obtained by clearing challenge acts. These range from mastering your chaos control abilities to dodging spiked balls, destroying a set number of enemies, or using your Doom powers in unique ways. They are a pretty fun way to extend the game time without being obtuse, just like the original. The last thing I want to talk about in this very long gameplay segment is the hub world of the game. Sonic Generations has to explore white space in a 2D space, but Shadow Generations ups the ante with a 3D mini open zone for you to explore. You can find and open collection boxes here that use tokens found by exploring different acts, collect entries of Gerald Robotnik's diary, and find machine parts to help Orbot and Cubot build a rocket. Except that rocket turns out to just be a useless clock that caused me to waste at least 4 hours of my life scrounging around for 80 of these things with absolutely no way to know where they all are so I can get some stupid achievement. Thanks, Sonic Team. Anyway, yeah, white space is just super fun to run around in. The platforming challenges to get some of these collectibles definitely gave me shades of the Update 3 tower challenges from Frontiers, which was probably the highlight of that for me. There are also a handful of time challenges like collecting these clocks in order before time runs out or getting a certain number of rings. They really test your ability to use the different moves in a way that truly feels like you've mastered the movement when it's done. Late into the game you can also switch between white space and Doom space. Doom space makes the open zone challenges harder, as well as adding more difficult challenge gates for each zone, and automatically switching all bosses to hard mode. I haven't personally tried out the hard mode bosses yet, but I was thinking we save that for a video later on. So that's about it on the gameplay front. They basically nailed it this time around, and considering that this is the first boost focused game since Forces, they've stepped up their game drastically. It's to the point where I'm honestly not sure if I'd rather have the next mainline title be a follow-up to this or Frontiers in terms of pure gameplay. It feels like they somehow perfected the boost formula a second time after doing it with Generations. So I kinda want to see them keep that going. Maybe we'll get more boost games in the form of side projects like this in between the big open zone releases, which I'd be more than down for. I've talked a little about the presentation of the game throughout, but I really can't stress enough that this is the best looking game in the series. In terms of graphical fidelity and art direction, this game is top notch with plenty of well realized details. Unleashed felt like that ceiling we just couldn't quite break through, but I feel like it's finally happened now with great performance to boot. The game in general is just incredibly polished, not a single hiccup in sight. This has to be the absolute smoothest 3D Sonic experience to date. It's peaking at Nintendo levels of polish, which, as I said in my Astrobot review, is just about the highest level of praise I can give in that regard. The main thing I really want to highlight here is the animation quality. Frontiers already saw a pretty big step from the previous games in its major cutscenes, but there was still a little bit of that stiffness we've been suffering since the adventure days. That all but disappeared entirely in Shadow Generations. The movements are incredibly fluid, actions are kinetic, and even the facial expression work here is leagues better than what we've had. Like when Shadow scoffs here, you can see his cheek rise up a bit. It might not seem like much, but these little details are what really sell the animation, and they understood that fully this time around. Even the in-game animations are just polished up versions of what we saw in Frontiers, with some stunning cinematics in the QuickTime events. I need them to keep up this kind of work for the next game. This is exactly where we need things to be from here on out. Most of all, it proves these character models really can work with great animation. They just never had the budget for it up until now. Then there's the music. These remixes really are something great. From the bombastic techno spin put on Final Rush's theme to the heavier guitars in Sunset Heights, some of these tracks surpass the originals, just like in Sonic Generations. Some of the other ones had to grow on me a little, namely the more dubstep oriented tracks of Bullet Station and Chaos Island Act 1, but I find myself going back to those every now and then. The only track I don't really mess with is Chaos Island Act 2. I think the idea was to make it sound like a classic Sonic track in Generations, but it comes off kinda weird and muted, especially next to the other tracks in the game. Across the board though, the presentation is, say it with me, some of the best in 3D Sonic. Even the menus are just bursting with personality like the original Generations, this time with a more shadowy spin on things. With that out of the way, I guess it's time we bring this thing home. Shadow Generations didn't just get by. It didn't just impress me. It didn't even just knock it out the park. No. This game knocked it out the damn stratosphere. This experience is on par and at times even better than the remastered Sonic Generations is bundled with. To the point where it almost feels like Sonic Team just wanted to make Shadow the Hedgehog 2 and then slap Sonic Generations onto it. It's easily one of the best Sonic games out there with a gripping story, fantastically remade levels, and immaculate presentation. They went above and beyond in all aspects for this one, and you can really feel the love the team poured into this thing. If you like Sonic Generations, get this game. If you're looking forward to seeing Shadow in the upcoming movie, get this game to learn more about him. If you really don't even fuck with Sonic like that, get this game. You will have a good time. 2 nearly perfect games in one package. You really can't go wrong here. And that's Sonic X Shadow Generations. I think it's safe to say that the fearless year of Shadow has ended with a bang. But what did you think of it? Let me know what you think of the package overall, or just what you thought of the Shadow Generations portion in the comments. As always, these reviews are an opportunity for us to have a conversation. My next review is going to be on Super Mario Party Jamboree, thinking I might take a different approach with that one since it's a very different kind of game than I usually cover. Stay tuned for that, and of course more Sonic content in the future by subscribing. Check out the live channel as well as the Twitch link below. That's all for now, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here soon.